By the time you realize you've been manipulated, it's already too late, because it never starts with force. It starts with something smaller, quieter, invisible, a glance, a tone, a single word. That's all it takes to trigger a reaction you didn't choose. But still obey. You think you're responding freely. You're not. You're following a script written into your subconscious years ago. And the people who know how to read those scripts, they don't argue, they don't explain, they don't raise their voice. They pull one invisible string, and you move. In this video, we reveal how subconscious triggers are used to control your behavior, shape your identity, and override your logic, without you even noticing. Until now. 1. What are subconscious triggers? A subconscious trigger is not a word, not a gesture, not even an action. It's a signal, a psychological switch. That activates a reaction inside you, without permission. You don't think, you don't choose, you just respond. That's the danger. It feels like free will, but it's not. It's programming. You hear a certain tone, and suddenly you feel guilty. Someone raises an eyebrow, and you start explaining. They ignore you for a few hours, and your mind starts spiraling. Not because of logic, but because something inside you has been conditioned to react. That's a trigger, and it lives below your awareness. It bypasses reason, goes straight to emotion, and hijacks your behavior. Before you realize what's happening, most people never question it. They think, I'm just sensitive. I just don't like conflict. I don't know why I overreacted. But it's not random. It's learned, reinforced, encoded, usually from childhood or trauma, or repeated exposure to power dynamics, where silence meant danger, approval meant safety, and disapproval meant punishment. Over time, your nervous system starts linking certain cues to certain emotions without needing context. And this is where manipulation thrives, because if someone figures out what triggers you, they don't need to fight you. They just pull the string and let you destroy yourself. They say one sentence and you spiral. They show one reaction and you chase validation. They give you 10 seconds of silence and you beg for connection. Not because they're powerful, but because you've been programmed to hand over your power. When certain buttons are pushed, the trigger isn't the problem. The fact that you don't see it is. 2. How triggers are installed over time. Subconscious triggers are not born, they're built. One repetition at a time, one emotional moment at a time, one power imbalance at a time. You weren't born flinching at silence, you learned it. Maybe as a child, silence meant danger. Maybe it meant disapproval, withdrawal, punishment. You weren't born craving approval. You were taught that love is earned by pleasing, by obeying, by staying small. That's how the system installs, through repetition and emotion. Because the subconscious doesn't learn through logic, it learns through pattern plus intensity. So when something happens often, and it hits you deeply, the brain encodes it as truth. Dad's voice gets cold when I speak up. You learn, stay quiet. Mom praises me when I act perfect. You learn, earn affection by performing. You get ignored if you set a boundary. You learn, compliance equals connection. It doesn't matter if it's rational. It matters if it's emotional. The stronger the feeling, the deeper the programming. And once it's in place, you don't question it. It becomes automatic. Now someone raises their voice. You shrink. Someone disapproves. You apologize. Someone goes cold. You panic. But it's not about them. It's about the original context that built the response. The current moment is just the trigger. The real program is buried. And that's what manipulators understand. They don't just talk to you. They talk to your triggers, your wounds, your conditioning. They don't need to overpower you. They just need to activate your pre-installed response. It could be a look, a delay, a compliment, a threat, even a pause. Anything that matches the old pattern, and your subconscious lights up like a trap. You obey without knowing why. You comply without understanding. You feel guilt, shame, fear, as if on cue. Because that's exactly what it is. A cue. A signal. A code. Planted years ago. Triggered now. Exploited by those who know where to look. And if you don't trace it back to the source, you'll keep reacting like a puppet in someone else's game. 3. How people use triggers to control you. The most effective control doesn't look like control. It looks like you choosing it yourself. But in reality, they didn't force you. They just pulled the right trigger and watched you move. That's how the game works. They don't need to raise their voice. They don't need to threaten you. They don't even need to ask. They just find what you respond to and build a system around it. 1. The reward trigger. They notice what makes you light up. Praise, validation, affection. Then they weaponize it. They withhold it when you push back. They flood you with it when you comply. Now your nervous system learns. Agree equals love. Disagree equals rejection. And suddenly, you don't argue anymore. Not because they won, but because your brain craves the reward. 2. The punishment trigger. They study what makes you uncomfortable. Guilt, silence, judgment, mockery. Then they attach it to disobedience. Set a boundary, they go cold. Speak your mind, they mock your tone. Take space, they guilt trip you. You learn, standing up for yourself equals pain, and pain equals compliance. 3. The threat of abandonment. This one is subtle. They hint that if you keep acting this way, they might not stay. They don't say it outright. They just let the idea hang. And if you've ever feared abandonment, even once, that trigger activates instantly. Now you adjust, so they don't leave, even if leaving would set you free, because freedom doesn't feel safe. When your trigger says, connection at all costs. 4. The echo of the past. Sometimes they don't create the trigger. They just mirror someone who did. Their tone reminds you of your father. Their silence reminds you of your mother. Their unpredictability reminds you of an ex. And without realizing it, you shrink in response, not to them, but to who they represent. That's the power of subconscious familiarity. They don't need to know your history. They just need to resemble it. This is how people control you. Without ever appearing controlling, they build a maze made of triggers, and you walk it willingly. Not because you're weak, but because the map was drawn, before you even knew you were playing. And unless you learn to see it, you'll keep mistaking manipulation for connection. 4. Recognizing your triggers. You can't disarm what you can't see, and your triggers are invisible until you start listening. Not to others, but to yourself, to your patterns, your reactions, your instincts. Because every time you overreact, shrink, apologize when you're not wrong, chase after silence, or feel guilt for setting a boundary. That's not you. That's programming. And to break it, you have to trace the wire back to the switch. 1. Notice what makes you shrink instantly. Certain tones, certain words, certain looks. You feel small, unsure, suddenly submissive. Pause. Ask yourself, why did I just feel the need to apologize? What exactly did they say? What part of me reacted before I even thought? The trigger is usually hiding in that moment. 2. Track your emotional flashpoints. You're calm, then suddenly you're angry or ashamed or panicked. That shift didn't come from nowhere. It was activated. Think, was it the silence, the delay in reply, a shift in their energy, a subtle rejection? You'll start seeing a pattern, and patterns reveal programming. 3. Look at who always makes you feel off. Certain people just pull something out of you. You feel reactive, uneasy, out of control. It's not always what they do, it's what they remind you of. Your triggers often wear familiar faces, people who resemble your past, and reawaken your old responses. You're not responding to this person. You're responding to the ghost behind them. 4. Pay attention to your body, not just your mind. Triggers aren't always loud. Sometimes they're physical, tight chest, shallow breath, sudden urge to explain, pressure to make peace. Before the thought even forms, the body reacts. That's the tell. The trigger lives in the nervous system, long before it makes it to your mouth. Learn to watch it, catch it, interrupt it. 5. Write down your automatic responses. If you always feel the need to, reply instantly. Keep the peace. Avoid conflict. Seek validation. Over-explain. Apologize without fault. That's not personality. That's conditioning. Document the triggers. Name them. Because the moment you name the pattern, you weaken its grip. Awareness breaks the autopilot, and what was once unconscious becomes a choice. You can't fight triggers with willpower. You dissolve them with clarity. The goal isn't to feel nothing. It's to feel without being controlled. Because once you see the puppet strings, you stop dancing. 5. How to deprogram and take back control. You've seen the pattern. You've felt the pull. You've watched yourself obey a reaction you didn't choose. Now comes the shift. Not by force, but by awareness. You don't fight the program head-on. You dismantle it piece by piece. 1. Observation is step 1. Every time you feel yourself react, pause, not forever. Just long enough to break the loop. 3 seconds of stillness. No words, no facial shift, just awareness. Ask yourself, what just got activated in me? Is this reaction mine or someone else's imprint? Because if it's automatic, it's not authentic. 2. Name the trigger, strip its power. If a phrase like, "You're being too sensitive," or "You always do this," sends you spiraling, write it down. Look at it, call it out. The moment you label a trigger, it loses its shadow form. It becomes visible, trackable, controllable. You don't fear what you understand. You command it. 3. Detach emotion from memory. Triggers live in emotional memory. not logic. So to dissolve them, you don't just think, you feel through them. When a trigger activates, breathe through the emotion. Don't run, don't react. Just stay. Stay present in the discomfort until it passes. That's how you rewire the nervous system. You teach it. This is not a threat. This doesn't own me anymore. 4. Replace reaction with response. Every reaction is a shortcut. You're not meant to shortcut anymore. So train yourself to respond with intention. They go silent. You don't chase. You observe. They push your guilt button. You don't explain. You clarify your boundary once. Then detach. They mock or minimize you. You don't defend your worth. You disengage. Because truth doesn't need defense. This is the strategy. Minimal emotion. Maximum clarity. 5. Recode your belief system. At the core of every trigger is a belief. I must be perfect to be loved. If I disappoint them, I'll be left. My needs don't matter. Silence means rejection. These beliefs aren't truths. They're viruses, installed in childhood, trauma, or manipulation. And now you rewrite the code. New beliefs. My peace doesn't depend on their approval. I don't owe emotional performance to feel worthy. Silence isn't danger. It's space. I can be powerful and still be misunderstood. Repeat them. Act from them. And over time, your subconscious will stop resisting. It will start realigning. 6. Withdraw consent. The final step is simple. Stop giving people access to the parts of you they haven't earned, your vulnerability, your loyalty, your reactivity. Not everyone deserves them. Not everyone respects them. So protect your triggers by owning them. Guard your emotions by mastering them, and reclaim your mind by exiting every loop you didn't choose to enter. This isn't emotional numbness. This is emotional sovereignty. You still feel, but you don't obey. You still care, but you don't collapse. You still connect, but only by conscious choice, because the war was never outside. It was in the space between. Stimulus and response. And now, that space belongs to you. Most people don't live by choice. They live by reaction, triggered by tone, by silence, by approval withheld, by fears they never questioned. And that's the prison. You obey patterns you didn't design. You submit to emotional codes, written by someone else. But the moment you see the strings, you stop dancing. You don't need to fight. You don't need to argue. You don't need to explain. You just need to notice. Name the trigger, pause the response, and choose again. Because that's the real power. The ability to respond instead of react. From that place, you become unpredictable, uncontrollable, untouchable. And when you stop being pulled by subconscious strings, you start pulling others without ever raising your voice. That's where we go next. In the next video, we reveal how to dominate without shouting, control without chaos, and shift any dynamic without saying a word. It's called power without noise, and once you master it, you'll never need to prove your strength again.